you will see your opponent playing Sicilian defense with black. It's not much of a higher opening, but there are too many variations and too much theory involved. What I am going to give you is a basic simple formula that you're going to use against any Sicilian move that follows you in the match. So what happened in the match? White started with e4 and black played obviously c5, playing a Sicilian defense. Now what I have taught my student that simply play knight f3 and then you will have to go d5, offering the exchange. So the mainly, what is the goal of Sicilian defense? In Sicilian defense, black wants to give their flank pawn, basically the c pawn, which is not the main central pawn, and exchange it with the d pawn at d4. They will get a mass center in the endgame and they will play accordingly. So what you need to do, you simply play knight f3, and then when they develop their knight behind the pawn in Sicilian opening, what happens when they have pushed the pawn earlier, this knight sits behind the pawn. But what happens if this pawn stays here and knight comes out, then the c pawn will be behind the knight and it has to lose a tempo because the knight have to be removed before the pawn comes out. That is where the Sicilian defense becomes special and becomes more tactical, more positional, because the pawn is out and then the knight comes out. So knight c6 is played and then you play d4. Now when you play d4, they have the option. They simply want to capture, because they cannot just capture it with the knight, because you will capture it the knight, then the pawn will capture, and of course the queen will capture, and then the queen will sit here, the pawn will sit here, the bishop is coming out, white is chilling. So they simply capture with the pawn, and when you capture here, the knight stays here looking at each other. Whoever captures loses something. This is a very common phenomena we see in chess. Whoever captures loses something. So you don't capture, you wait and you watch what black follow. In this game, black played e5. In most of the time, black would play g6 and then fianchet their bishop on g7 and then try to attack this knight again, because this knight is attacking. You have your heavy piece as a defender, so when the knight takes, you cannot take back with the queen, because simply your bishop will capture it. If the pawn comes, you simply develop your knight, and when the bishop comes out, you simply develop your bishop. And now what's the case? That if the knight is going to capture, you simply capture with the bishop, offering the trade of the bishops. And if black trades off, again, whoever trades loses something. So what happens when black chose to take your knight? You simply take with the bishop, and when bishop is taken, you simply take with the queen, and now the white is actually showing +2 advantage because it is directly giving a threat to the rook. How will it defend it? If he is not matured and pushes the f pawn, which is playable, but still it created a lot of dark side weakness along the king's camp. Now the knight will come out, and then you can harass this knight and make it to go, and this is how you play. But white gains an advantage of +2 here, which is in most cases decisive advantage. So after e5, I prefer to go knight b3, and this is exactly what my student did. He moved his knight to knight b3 because from b3 is actually targeting the center, and then he can anyway go to c5 and attack around the king and the queen. Moreover, this knight at b can move to c3, and these two knights will actually capture so many pieces around the center. And now bishop b4 comes. Black choose to give a check, and the plan maybe is to get this knight out and castle. Knight c3. White is working on fundamentals. White is simply making their move, prioritizing the development, because in this case they'll get their pieces out, simply put their king castle, and when your king is safe, you can play accordingly. And then d6 happened. So they're not taking out this knight and not castling and putting their king in the center. That's taking the advantage. They simply, again, white doing bishop e2. You can also go to bishop b5, pinning this knight around. But when you give options to black, and black knows, oh, they have a king also, then they will start thinking about the knight getting out, and then they'll castle. So whenever you get such opportunity, you can also play this, but you can also play safe. It depends what is the mood of the game. What do you actually want to play with? What are you comfortable with? You have to choose. And then knight f6 is played. So now black wants to typically castle. White do not castles at this moment. It simply goes with bishop g5 and pitch this knight to this queen. Because if white gets castled, and whenever white gets an opportunity, white wants to double attack this knight. And if white gets an opportunity to take this knight here, now the queen won't be able to capture because the bishop is guarding there, and then he'll have to capture with the pawn, destroying their kingside structure. And now bishop e6 happened. Maybe the bishop is targeting on the knight. In this case, the best move should be castle, and yes, he did. He castled, and then h6. h6 is a very passive move here. I don't know why he played h6, because white is anyway going to capture it, and when the queen captured it, he can simply put its knight on the center at d5. So what has happened in the game? Okay, he took, and the queen comes out, and the knight is now attacking the queen. The only option he got to not waste a tempo is to simple capture it. But when you capture, the pawn captures and attacks the knight. Now the knight have to move. Oh, this is not a good move. Knight going back. Going back seems like a mistake here, because this knight should have come in the center. Why not? Because then if the pawn gets out, the queen is not able to capture because the queen is protecting it. Although the problem is that this rook can anyway come to the e file and attack this king, because the king stays in the center. This is where the fundamental comes in. You have to prioritize development and focus on making your king safe. This is the most prominent rule. And then what happened in the game? That black moved in with knight e7 and simply bishop to b5 plus. White could have played c3 attacking the bishop, but I understand what is going through the white's mind. White gave a check because there is no way to block this check, and now this king is not safe. The king has to move in or out, although it can be done after a move, because when you attack with the c3, the bishop has to choose to go back, and when it goes here, because it cannot go and simply be captured by the knight, and if it comes on c5, you can simply capture it, and when the pawn capture it, then you can move on to give a check and allow this king to move out, because this pawn is protecting c6 square, so this knight cannot block the check. That you move with the c3 and bishop will go out, and you will simply capture. Okay, all right, and then bishop b5. You can do one move first and then the other move later, it doesn't matter. And then king goes in, king, and after the king move, there's a d6, and knight could move to knight f5 attacking this pawn, and then d7 could be there because this is protected by the bishop. Slowly this pawn is going in and targeting the queen movement there. The rook have to capture. Right now the queen cannot capture, but still this rook have to sit behind and block this, and rook d8 would follow, and then queen can move up the board targeting the another pawn, and this would lead to a decisive advantage. Moving forward, what happened in the game after king to e7, the check bishop b5, the knight cannot block, so king move in, and when king moves in, now is the time to attack a3. The plan is same, computer is suggesting c3, and white actually played here a3, not a bad move, because the idea is the same, to push the bishop to move either to the two places, and we move to c5. Knight captures, pawn captures. Now this pawn is a weak pawn, this pawn is a weak pawn, and now the pawn push happened, d6 attacking the knight. Now remember, this pawn will get pushed again because it is safeguarded by the bishop, and knight c6 is not a very good move. Knight should have moved to f5 attacking again this pawn, and then this rook could come and attacking another, putting in another attacker to the pawn, and then the pawn would fall. But now in this situation, the queen can go in, and what is happening here, that after the bishop takes and pawn takes, queen will simply take this pawn again and will be a pawn up. So after rook to d8 attacking this pawn, white obviously would capture. I knew that. And then after the pawn capture, as I explained, he simply captured queen c6. But I would like to mention here, this is not the correct move in this situation, because you lose all your advantage. The advantage would have come after rook a to d1, because this knight is not going to move anywhere, because whenever you capture this pawn is going to be captured back. If the knight moves, there is nothing much, because queen can capture another pawn, and if the queen is capturing d6, bishop c4 is the safest option there, because now this knight cannot move and you can attack it with this pin. Of course, they will move it with a check, but when the king moves, what do you have? Because you can capture, the rook will capture, and then this rook will be capture. So you get two rooks for a queen, and that is also winning because your queen has already taken one pawn. You can attack this, you can attack this, you can attack the knight, and the king is stuck in the center. So this pawn is also typically weak, the rook, and that should be winning. So after bishop c6 capturing, the pawn captures and queen capture, exchange was offered and the game is coming to equal. Of course, the queen exchange done, rook takes at d6, another rook is offered, king ignored it, take happened, and then rook to d1. And king moves to c6, and after that pawn moves to c4, rook to b8, attacking this pawn here. Of course, white will also attack some pawn. No, white choose to defend it, going in a passive direction. And now a5, and after a5 comes g3, making your king safe. No worries for any back rank, and then f5, and after f5 there's rook moves to d5, attacking these two pawns. Any one is going to fall because after you do this, king would get activated. So what happened in the match? After rook d5, rook chose to take another pawn, and here white also chose to take a pawn. And whatever happens after this, rook is going to collect all the pawns here and then follow. The match is currently equal, but after rook c2, black resigned here. The match is currently equal with the black resigned here. Why? Because there's a domination of this rook. Black must have thought that I am losing another pawn and that is enough to get the match converted. He forgot that he would be able to move to c3 and capture this pawn and capture this pawn, and these two pawns would follow down. The game is equal because white will be running their h pawn and black would want to take these two pawns down the hill. Hope you have been getting some clarity about how to play, how to improve the game. So I have created a community named Vishal Chess School where there are so many features available and you will get your game reviewed. There are courses to follow and so many features that have come up. So if you're interested, you want to learn chess, you can go and register in there, and I will see you there. Bye.